Afghanistan is a land forged in fire, where war has never truly left, even for a moment, across the span of centuries. But beyond the battles, behind the raids and the military operations, there exist stories that were never written into any official report. From formless shadows drifting across midnight watch posts, to ghostly laughter echoing beside ancient graves, and even a towering creature with 6 fingers and glowing red eyes, each tale has been whispered by the very soldiers who once walked those blood-stained hills. Are these merely hallucinations, born from minds pushed to their breaking point? Or are they fragments of a reality we were never meant to touch? Today's video takes you deep inside those unsolved mysteries, into a world where war might not be the most terrifying thing of all. So fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. When a soldier steps onto the battlefield, they carry with them a very specific definition of what constitutes an enemy. They are trained to confront stray bullets, ambushes, and the sudden crack of explosions tearing through the silence of night. In their minds, danger is a familiar companion, something to be expected, calculated, and faced head-on each day. But Afghanistan holds threats that no tactical map has ever marked. Since the events of September 11th, thousands of American troops have set foot in this unforgiving land under a clear mission to hunt down terrorists. They built outposts in the most desolate corners of the country, patrolled narrow mountain roads, and stationed themselves hundreds of miles from any sign of civilization. But alongside the military objectives, something else began to emerge, something the official war logs never recorded. Some soldiers claim to have seen flickering lights drifting through the darkness, not from flashlights or flares, but cold blue glows, as if something unseen was watching them. Electronic devices malfunctioned in inexplicable ways. Fully charged batteries would suddenly die, radios would fall silent without obstruction, and rifles jammed at the most critical moments. These were no longer simple technical failures. They were part of a disturbing pattern that forced a deeper question. Was there an invisible force trying to interfere? In the pitch-black deserts of Helmand and the icy ravines of Kandahar, reports surfaced of towering silhouettes standing motionless in the distance. Figures resembling men, silently observing the troops, only to vanish the instant a night vision scope was raised. Some soldiers swore they were knocked to the ground by something the eye could not see. And when they returned to base, they came back shaken, terrified even. Yet no one laughed, because their brothers in arms had seen it too, and that was only the beginning. What they would face next would reach far beyond fear itself. Modern warfare, with all its technology, tactics, and layers of command, still cannot eliminate the unpredictable. And for 3 soldiers stationed at Outpost Diamondback in Mosul, Iraq in 2004, what they witnessed that day would shatter everything they thought they knew about the term enemy. Jerry Aberdeen and his 2 comrades were conducting a routine Humvee patrol along the perimeter of the base. The air was thick with heat, red dust clung stubbornly to the windshield, and their pulse barely rose. Just another day in a hostile zone. But that changed the moment they noticed movement near the fence line. Their first assumption was simple: insurgents attempting a breach. Without hesitation, the trio dismounted, took up position, and opened fire. One target went down. The others fled, vanishing into the scorched distance, leaving behind a lone body collapsed beside the steel fence. Everything still felt routine, until it wasn't. That was when one of the soldiers noticed something strange. A thin line of black smoke began to rise from the mouth of the fallen intruder. At first, they assumed it was steam from a fresh wound, or lingering residue from gunfire. But this smoke did not dissipate. It curled and twisted, coiling upward from the corpse like a miniature whirlwind, defying the desert air. Within seconds, the haze began to take shape, a translucent figure, nearly 2 meters tall, vaguely human in form, but unnervingly incomplete. Jerry remembered every detail. The eyes, glowing red like burning coals, locked directly onto them. Its mouth stretched open, unnaturally wide, as if screaming, but no sound came out, not a whisper. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure dissolved, leaving nothing behind. All three men saw it, every one of them. Jerry would go on to recount the story in interviews no fewer than 10 times, and perhaps the most unsettling part was not the tale itself, but the look in his eyes when he told it, that unmistakable stare of a man who wasn't lying. In the rugged central mountains of Afghanistan, where jagged cliffs cut through the landscape and cold winds howled through narrow rock passes, an 8-man special operations team was assigned what seemed to be a straightforward mission: infiltrate, identify the target, and extract safely. These were men well accustomed to moving under cover of night, to walking in silence, and to facing danger with a level-headed calm. But what they encountered on this mission was something entirely different. For 2 days, the team camped on high ground, observing the village below where their target was believed to be hiding. Everything went according to plan until the second night. Without warning, their entire communication system went dark. At first, it was barely noticeable, a low, droning buzz, like the faint sound of an insect trapped in a wire. But within minutes, the noise grew in volume and frequency until it pierced their skulls like a drill, causing nausea and mental paralysis. The strongest man on the team began to vomit. The lead scout collapsed to his knees, clutching his head in agony. The soldiers, now rattled, could only dig into the earth, pressing their bodies low against the ground, gripping their weapons tightly as if bracing for an ambush. That was when one of the sentries saw it, something white gliding toward them. The entire team flipped down their night vision goggles, and that was the moment logic ceased to apply. There was no heat signature. The figure wore a long, flowing white robe that touched the ground, yet it didn't seem to walk. It hovered, drifting just above the earth. Each movement was silent, but the wind seemed to still with every glide of its body. Its eyes glowed with a deep, burning red, unblinking, locked onto the soldiers. Then, something even more disturbing happened. One of its arms detached, falling to the ground without making a sound. But instead of thudding like flesh, it melted, curled like smoke, and then reattached itself to the figure, effortlessly, as if it had never fallen at all. The soldiers, trained to face death without flinching, were paralyzed. Their fingers clutched their triggers, but none dared fire. Something primal screamed in the back of their minds. This is not something to provoke. A moment later, another sound shattered the stillness. From the village below, torches suddenly flared to life. Shouts, footsteps, the thundering approach of what was likely Taliban forces coming to investigate the anomaly. The white figure stopped. Then, without a word, it turned and vanished, leaving no trace behind. 2 days later, a better-equipped infantry unit was sent into the village. But what they found was a scene beyond comprehension. Human flesh, torn and dismembered, was strewn across the entire area. There were no signs of a firefight, no craters from explosions, only mangled bodies, blood dried into the dirt, and weapons lying untouched. If there is one story that has left even the most seasoned American soldiers stationed in Afghanistan in stunned silence, it is the tale of the Giant of Kandahar. In 2002, a U.S. military patrol unit was tasked with a reconnaissance mission in the mountainous region south of Kandahar. They left base as they had many times before, without any sign that something was amiss. But they never returned. A special operations team was dispatched shortly afterward to investigate what had happened. Armed with advanced equipment and years of combat experience, they followed the last known signal of the missing patrol, which led them down a narrow path into a region of towering rock formations. Just a few hundred meters in, they began to find signs of something deeply troubling: fragments of destroyed military equipment, shredded backpacks, shattered radios, and scattered patches of dried blood. They pressed forward and soon came upon the mouth of a dark cave. At its entrance lay human bones strewn across the ground, tattered clothing, insignias and military dog tags still clinging to what was left. In that razor-thin moment of silence, something lunged out of the cave, so fast that no one had time to react. The point man was thrown backward, impaled by a primitive wooden spear that pierced through his body armor and pinned him to the ground like a bag of sand. The team froze, and then a roar tore through the valley, unlike any sound known to man or beast. From the blackness of the cave, it emerged. A towering creature, more than 13 feet tall, with tangled red hair like a lion's mane and a thick beard hanging down to its chest. Muscles rippled beneath its sun-darkened skin, which looked as hard and weathered as mountain stone. It wore garments stitched from animal hides, and in its hands were massive weapons, sharpened bones the size of a grown man's arm. But the most terrifying features were its hands, each with 6 fingers and a jaw lined with teeth as sharp as razors. No one needed orders. The team opened fire. Bullets from their 5.56mm rifles rained down on the creature, tearing through the air. But still, it charged. Not until they had emptied round after round, using M4 rifles, sidearms, and even grenades, did the monster finally collapse and lie still. Retrieving the creature's body proved to be nearly impossible. It weighed over 1,100 pounds, and the stench it emitted was so foul that the helicopter crew transporting it was forced to wear gas masks. A portion of the body was loaded onto a C-130 cargo plane, but according to those present, the remains began to decay at an abnormal rate, even under cold storage conditions. What stood out the most, however, was what came after. The mission files for the entire Special Operations team were sealed under top-secret classification, but as with every military secret in history, fragments of truth began to leak. Some began to compare the creature to the Nephilim, giant offspring of fallen angels and humans mentioned in the Old Testament. And if that theory holds any truth, then perhaps the giant of Kandahar was never just a legend. Perhaps it was proof that ancient scriptures still hide truths we are not yet ready to confront. There are certain posts on the battlefield that no soldier ever wants to be assigned to, not because of poor visibility or the high risk of ambush, but because of the stories passed down by those who came before. At outpost Hassanabad, deep within the infamous Helmand province, there was one such place. The soldiers had a simple name for it: the Rock. In truth, the Rock was nothing more than a guard station, built atop the crumbling foundation of an ancient mud fortress, elevated roughly 6 meters above the desert floor. From a tactical standpoint, it was an ideal location, offering a commanding view of the entire southern perimeter of the base. But from the very first days of occupation, soldiers assigned to this post began to sense that something was off. At first, it was just small glitches, fresh radio batteries inexplicably drained, flashlights that had just been checked suddenly died, rifles jammed without reason. Experienced troops tried to explain it away with technical faults. But the strangest thing was that these malfunctions only occurred at the Rock. As soon as the equipment was removed from the post, it worked perfectly again. Then came the nights. Guards started to report the sound of footsteps crunching slowly over gravel, heavy, deliberate, as if someone was pacing behind them. But every time they turned around, there was nothing there. Some heard groaning or wheezing just inches from the back of their necks. Others were convinced that a voice had whispered in Russian, low and guttural, into their ears. One corporal, named Oleg, refused to return to the Rock after his first night on duty. He claimed that something had stood directly behind him, coughed softly, and then murmured a sentence in a rasping, bitter voice. Oleg withdrew from the position in near panic and was formally reassigned within days. Within weeks, more and more young soldiers were pleading with their commanders not to be posted there. Some stayed awake for entire shifts, too afraid to blink or turn their backs. And still, the phenomena continued. Things reached a breaking point when a young sentry spotted a still, upright figure standing silently in the distance. He lifted his night vision scope to get a better look, but through the green glow of the lens, the figure wasn't there. He lowered the scope. The figure had moved closer, close enough now that he could hear it breathing. The story of the rock swept through the outpost like a cold wind. No one spoke of it officially. No report was ever filed. But from that moment on, not a single soldier stood night watch at the rock without bringing some kind of protective charm. Sometimes the most terrifying sound is not a scream, but a laugh. A sound that, on its own, seems harmless. But when it echoes through the stillness of a battlefield night, it becomes unbearable. And for the soldiers of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, stationed at Fob Salerno in Khost Province, southeastern Afghanistan, that was exactly what they endured. Their watch post had been constructed on what locals called the Old Graveyard, marked by 2 crumbling stone towers. But for the guards assigned there, it wasn't just a strategic location. It was hallowed ground, where many lives had been lost long before their arrival. From the very first nights, strange things began to happen. At first, it was only a sudden chill in the air. Then came the sound of wind whistling through the rocks, and eventually, they began to hear something far more unsettling: the laugh of a child. The sound came close, right beside the ear. Crystal clear, high-pitched, and unmistakably young, but it carried a cruel mockery, like it knew exactly how helpless they were. The first soldier to report it activated both his night vision scope and thermal sight, desperately trying to confirm what was around him. Some tried to brush it off, blaming fatigue, hallucinations from sleep deprivation. But then came another night. A young sentry turned around, sensing someone standing just behind him. And when he did, he found himself face to face with a small, pale figure, its eyes wide open, unblinking, just staring into his own. No one else witnessed the event. But the soldier did not speak a single word for 3 days afterward, not because he was told not to, but because something inside him had gone silent. At first, the commanders believed it was a classic case of combat stress or early signs of PTSD. But when the second and then the third soldier began showing similar symptoms, the purely psychological explanation started to fall apart. Some whispered that it was the spirit of a little girl, killed in some long-forgotten battle, still trapped there, unable to move on. Others believed it wasn't a ghost at all, but something far more ancient, a mimic. A shapeless entity that wore the image of a child, not to comfort, but to confuse and ultimately unravel the minds of the living. Perhaps most chilling of all was this: not a single piece of recording equipment ever captured the sound of that laugh. And much like the rock, the guard post soon earned a reputation no one dared acknowledge aloud. Young soldiers began inventing excuses to avoid being stationed there. Some even volunteered for patrol duty in the open desert, knowing full well that ambush was more likely beyond the wire. But between a firefight that you can see coming and a disembodied giggle whispering just behind you in the dark, not everyone was willing to choose the first. When a soldier says he saw a 4-meter-tall creature with razor-sharp teeth, 6 fingers on each hand, and eyes glowing like embers, it's easy to attribute it to post-traumatic stress. When a group of soldiers claim they saw a white figure glide across the ground, leaving no heat signature, unhindered by trees or terrain, vanishing into the night as though it had never existed, we might chalk it up to exhaustion or hallucination brought on by extreme conditions. But when stories like these begin to echo across multiple units in different regions over the span of several years, we're left with one haunting question. If none of them are lying, then what exactly are we dealing with? What has unfolded in the deserts and mountain ranges of Afghanistan bears little resemblance to fairy tales. Instead, it feels eerily close to ancient beings or forgotten entities once spoken of in myth, beings that exist just beyond the reach of human understanding. The giant of Kandahar is impossible to separate from the image of the Nephilim, creatures mentioned in the Bible as the offspring of fallen angels who interbred with the earliest humans. These were not merely towering beings of immense strength, but entities of non-human essence, creatures punished and buried beneath the earth, banished so they could no longer pose a threat to mankind. But the Nephilim aren't the only ancient entities that mirror what soldiers have described. The strange figures reported near outposts like Diamondback and Hassanabad bear uncanny resemblance to the jinn of Islamic and Middle Eastern lore. Jinn, sometimes referred to as beings of smokeless fire, are said to live alongside humans, composed of fire and air, invisible to the naked eye, but endowed with intellect and emotion. In the Quran, they are described as creatures capable of moving freely between worlds, shifting forms, speaking human languages, and even interfering in human affairs, especially when disturbed or provoked. And jinn are often said to dwell in abandoned places, cursed lands, graveyards, caves, and deserts. These are, quite precisely, the very places where modern military outposts have been established. If that holds true, then these soldiers may have unknowingly trespassed into sacred ground, territory belonging to entities no longer bound by myth, but still hidden just beyond the veil of our understanding. After everything that's been recounted, from the shadowy figure inside a military base, to the eerie laughter echoing through an ancient graveyard, to the heatless light drifting silently through the midnight forest, and the body of a giant creature hoisted onto a plane with 6 fingers and teeth like blades, we are left with one truly unsettling question. If all of it is real, then how exactly does the world we think we understand actually work? Perhaps for decades we've built ourselves a framework of comfort, something neat and explainable, and called it modern science. We've reached into the stars, measured gravitational waves, and built telescopes to glimpse the moment of the Big Bang. But have we ever truly looked deep enough into the very ground we're standing on? War has a way of opening doors that peace never touches. When humans are pushed to the brink of survival, when lands long forgotten are reopened and repurposed as military outposts, the things buried in silence may begin to stir. Afghanistan, with its mountains rising like walls between 2 realities, its cave systems as deep as sealed memory, is not merely a strategic battlefield. It is a labyrinth of time, a fragmented manuscript of entities that may have walked this earth long before humans ever put ink to stone. These beings we call Nephilim, jinn, ghosts, may not be legends after all. And if you've heard stories like these and felt skeptical, that is only natural. But remember this, every legend begins with denial, and every step forward in human understanding begins with a moment that defies explanation. Afghanistan, for thousands of years, has been the graveyard of empires. But perhaps, on a deeper level, it is also the graveyard of forgotten truths. You might not believe everything you've just heard, but if something in these stories stirred a question within you, or if you've ever come across something similar, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm always ready to read and to go deeper with you into the things that remain unexplained. And if you'd like to keep exploring mysterious journeys like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell.